Brothers, welcome to the Finished Man podcast, where we discuss that journey of manhood, not only the formation of boys to be men, but also what it takes to form young men to grow in further manliness. This is Dr. Phil Chavez, and I'm with Chuck Harvey. And our aim here is we wish to get to the heart of some of the tougher issues and offer concrete steps and solutions. So, before we begin, let's start with a prayer. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Heavenly Father, we just place ourselves again in your presence. Father, you're just so good. We just ask that you could just continue to increase your understanding within us of what we were called as men, to the dynamics by which we must orient our life, and to all that you summon us to do for our families, for society, and in our church. Father, just direct all our progress here. We hope that it all may become pleasing to you, and all directing us to the image of your Son. We ask all these things in his name. Amen. Amen. All right, Chuck, what do you have here? Where should we start?
Well, I thought, I was thinking, going over what we talked about in the previous two episodes. I thought maybe a good thing to do to start with, especially if people are just joining us for the first time, happen to come into this episode or haven't watched since a week or so ago. To go over, what do we mean by finished man, or what do you mean by the term the finished man?
Yeah, in some way, in general, I mean, whenever a male becomes everything he's called to be for maturity as a man in the order of nature and the order of grace. Now, it's interesting how in today's language, oftentimes in Christian circles, we're just concerned with what it means to save our souls, So sometimes we think, well, it's just a matter of our final end is to go to heaven someday. And so to be a man or a woman would be to teach them, I don't know, in some way how to go to heaven someday as a male or a female. And along the way, learn what it is to be a good father and a good mother and all the rest. But it's true that eternal life is our destination, but our mission is to become everything we're called to be in the order of nature and the order of grace. And so, as I mentioned last time, in fact, I think I skipped one, and I wrote those down this time, when it comes to the 7 areas of formation, Pius XI taught there's 7 areas that educators, parents need to be aware of when forming their children. Okay, I wrote them down, so I'm reading so I don't get these wrong. The spiritual, intellectual, moral, physical, emotional, domestic, and social. Those are 7 areas of human formation, which the pontiff teaches there must be clarity on the part of educators and on the part of parents to have a vision of these and how they're to form them in their children. So you can see how important it is what we're doing here, and certainly much reading material needs to be generated, because I don't really know of anything out there in the Catholic or the Christian world that actually has that laid out well. But drilling into that, what I find is for myself is that when I talk about the full character of masculinity or manhood, I like to think of those 18 pillars that I've designed, because to me, everything seems to agree down back to those. And they go back to a man's deeper questions. What do I do? Who am I? And where am I going? His mission, what he does to be a leader, protector, provider, priest, prophet, and king. Who is he? He's a beloved son, a loyal brother, a vital man. We'd say a finished man. Then devoted husband, strong father, and veteran sage. Son, brother, man, husband, father, sage. And in his journey, he's called to move from a phase of exploration, then initiation, then testing, and then what I call resolution, combat, and glory. So hopefully, future shows will be able to move through some of those, or all of those, excuse me. So there's only 18 pillars. I find that everything I talk about when it comes to manhood can fit under one of those pillars in some way. So they've been tested. I've concocted that, I don't know, about 16 years ago, and I changed one of those pillars. I forget what I used to use for resolution. It was something else. But those 18 have been, I don't know, foundational for me, and I keep repeating them. Now, I think it's possible in forming the young man to be, the boy to be a man, he can actually know these 18 pillars, at least at his level. And I think it's important that a father, he may not enunciate what it means to say, son, I'm going to form you intellectually and socially and morally and domestically and all the rest. That may not mean anything to him. But it would mean something to him if he were to talk about what it is to be a leader, a protector, a provider, those things resonate immediately. And so it's possible. Well, I know it can be done because a youth has enough experience to understand those 18 pillars, at least in his level of understanding. And so I think in starting out, I think a father, so the son has some understanding of where his father's taking him, is to have at least a nominal understanding of these 18 pillars, and that his father can certainly wants to form him in these. So when the son says, or he resists, he said, well, son, I'm trying to teach you to be a protector. So, you know, we got to learn how to do some rigorous stuff. So the reason why we're going out in nature so much, because in your journey, we got to get this exploration out of your system, you know, the quest to move into other things. So the reason I'm teaching you these new things, remember, because I need to initiate you into things to learn to become a man, practical things to use with your hands and whatnot. So I think a boy can understand these things pretty readily. I think they're very close to our experience. But I find too, is that of all those pillars, you know, there's something very key, even though our man's identity is most important. I think there's something most key about teaching a young man to be a leader, a protector, and a provider. In some way, everything hinges on those. And if he doesn't get those right, he never comes really into the fullness of manhood. And again, for us men, you know, the bigger question that surrounds our life, the deeper one is, who am I? But the most immediate and proximate is, what do I do? What am I called to do? It's the most immediate question for a man. So, and rightly so, you know, as men, we're called to accomplish things. And if we didn't, society would fall apart. If we are not leading, protecting, providing, any culture or nation will actually be overcome by another if men don't understand those roles. So I find that's very important. But in terms of like that relationship element, and I'll just close with this before we go on to something else, is that I find that, and this is clear for the spiritual life, but it's also clear, I believe, in the temporal journey, is that in moving along in these things and having some at least general guidance, if you don't have the instruction manual, and I don't know any parent who's ever received that instruction manual, but
I haven't gotten mine yet.
Yeah, it's in the cloud somewhere, right? And so if you don't have the instruction manual, a lot of it comes down to a relationship with God and moving with God the Father yourself, and expecting the Spirit to kind of help direct you and move you and prompt you to raise your son into what he needs to be. And also it happens on the part of the son. The son needs to learn what it is to move in a relationship with God. So he trusts that God will guide him and lead him and prompt him, inspire him, and give him the grace to accept the things that his father's telling him that he may not understand. And maybe in the grace too, through his relationship with God, it challenges father too. Hey, Dad, shouldn't we be doing this? You know, isn't this something we should be engaged in? So it works both ways, to both learn, to grow, and to lead another in growth. Yeah. So,
now, would you agree that all of us, all men, are called to be mentors, and specifically fathers to other, well, not only boys but also girls, but who aren't necessarily our biological children? And I happen to be a biological father, so I do have actual children, but I think sometimes men might think, well, I don't have kids, so I'm not called to do this. But when you say we're all called to do this in our life?
That's right. Yeah. In fact, even if a young man enters a high school seminary, even at that time too, his formators should form him into the fullness of manhood for which his priesthood is built on. And so to form a man in sonship, to form in brotherhood, and to form him in well, the finished man, but to learn what it is to become a spouse and to embrace that all that entails. He may not, again, live it in the seminary, but he must embrace it all as being a reality which he's called to the order of nature. And then fatherhood as well. And every man has that fatherly heart that must be woken up. And so even myself, I don't have kids. You know, I was in ministry and I just have a missionary spirit about myself. And so what we do now is the most important thing in my life, and helping men find their way and helping families find theirs as well. And so that spirit of being a father, I find that I foster very deeply in my life, and it's what gives me the most fulfillment. And so I have actually, I could say by extended sense, many sons and daughters. And so fathers, there's many men and many women. I wouldn't even know which is more, because usually women come for help and not men, but I mentor many people. And so even when it comes to Father's Day, I probably get more Father's Day wishes than most natural fathers, because I just extend myself that way, and people, they receive that fatherly spirit from me. So again, that's one of the more fulfilling things that I do as well. But I find that's necessary to wake up. And so you can see this too in your priest, your pastor, that if he doesn't have these qualities, these natural qualities, becomes disconnected from him, then you don't even think about approaching him to ask for advice on parenting, other than the authority he may have. But if he's disconnected from those realities, which I think some priests are, or become disconnected, which is very, very fortunate, because it touches everything that they do. So every grown man, every grown woman needs to in some way reach a certain fullness of formation, at least at their initial level, appropriate to their age, what it is to be a father and a mother. So everything they do can somewhat flow out of that. And I think that's also important too, because ultimately what forms the human person is to become a father and a mother. That's what ultimately should always be the aim in all formation. And so even if someone is called spiritually away from that, either a woman for a consecrated life or for a man for a consecrated life, it should come out of a foundation of already wanting to be a father and a mother, and to see this as growing in maybe a higher level, we could say. And but that becomes, again, the base of all thing. And again, I think too, the reason why youth don't mature today is because we're not raising them for fatherhood or motherhood. We usually raise them to succeed in school and in a job, and in doing so get them involved in all these activities, which in some way are disconnected from fatherhood, motherhood, where youth throughout their entire formation, well, especially after they turn 13, when they hit puberty, they should begin to understand that you're called to be a father or a mother someday. And of course, that's in some way even implanted. You see this in the 3-year-old child. Every boy, he loves sticks and spears, and he wants to do things. He wants to be a fireman, a policeman. A woman, will play, young girl will play with dolls and do feminine things and want to help her mother in the kitchen, at least most of the time. Now, youth are being distracted from those things by social media and all their devices. I get that. But it's fatherhood, motherhood, for which, if we aim for that in our formation, it really directs our formation, and it perfects it.
So what can we do specifically as men to exercise our fatherhood in any context to start to help form the young men in our lives into becoming finished men?
What's interesting? That's a good question, because at one time, now I lost the list, but I actually one time, I know where that list is. I haven't consulted it in a while, but at one time I actually wrote down, okay, who are the young men that I need to reach out to the most? So the first was my brothers, well, even my older one, but of course I'm not a father to him, but even my younger ones, there's kind of a, insofar as an older brother to younger brother, there's sort of a father-son relationship there in an extended sense, especially if the relationship is more distant in years. And then it comes, your cousins, your relations, niece and nephews and nieces. And then it comes to men that you find in your periphery or your life, who are just either proximate to you or they've just come into your life for whatever reason. And so it's good to reach out to them regularly. Now, for me, I have 6 younger sisters, and so I try to reach out to them regularly. In fact, for some of us men, I think it's good, and I don't think it's like legalistic or too formal, but even to write a list to remember us. Well, I need to call each of my sisters at least once a month or once every other month. And even check that off in a way too. Otherwise, for us men, we won't get to that. But I think we're supposed to be reaching out even on a regular level. And I do have, unfortunately, I don't go through a list anymore, but oftentimes I'll think of, and this happens about every other week, I'll place a call to somebody I think who, a mentoree, a junior, male and female, who I believe I need to reach out to. Just say, hey, how's it going? What's up? What's going on in your life? hopefully it's going smooth. You know, if you want to talk about anything, I'm here to talk. So, and usually at that time, I find that youth just need to be heard. And so one of the ways I find men move into a natural role of fatherhood, and it starts with just hearing out a younger person. And so even at my church, you know, I'll meet new men and women too. Mostly men will come up to me. They kind of understand the ministry I'm involved in. And they'll introduce themselves, or somebody introduce them to me. And I'll ask them, first question out of my gate is not where you go to school or they're in college, you know, what's your major, but, or even what they're doing for work. If they're old enough, I ask, what are you passionate about? Now, most men will have a blank face, which is unfortunate. They can't speak of any of their passions, and that's pretty sad. And I usually say, well, anything you're passionate about. They think they need to give some noble answer or something, but anything that they're passionate about. And so it's important, I think, in a parent, you know, or a father or mother, you know, part of being a parent, it obviously, is to reach out and to train and to guide and to lead. But if you're not the physical parent, sometimes an obligation, or rather a duty of a secondary father or a father figure, is to draw something out of the young first before you gain their trust, because they need to know that they're worthy, and you're giving them time to be heard. That validates them, and then they begin to trust. And then you could say, well, you might want to try this, or I'd recommend this, or, you know, when that same thing happened in my life, I think the most helpful thing for me was this and this. And so we can find ourselves in a parenting situation just by hearing someone out and then giving our reactions to that.
I was going to ask you, how much of a difference does it make what age the young person is? Like, in other words, is there different needs for, you know, a young boy versus a teenage boy versus a boy approaching adulthood, in terms of what are they looking for that would help them in their formation?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. I mean, we all know that boys are different from 13 to 16 to 16 to 19 to 19 to, say, 22 after college, post-college. And men change too when they're 25 if they have a job, and even when they're 30, they're different too. And they have different questions. But, you know, it's interesting, even going back to that first point, to hear a man out, no matter where he's at. Now, I don't ask that question of what a man's passionate about if he's 45. I don't ask that. But usually a young man, 40, probably not, maybe in his 30s, 20s, and teens. And because that's more of a youth kind of a question. But yeah, there is something to drawn out by at different levels for men at different stages. And sometimes for the younger the stage, it's important to be more validating. However, at the same time, I find too that sometimes men need to take a little courage and believe that, well, if I give this young man advice after I hear him, I can be confident in that. And I think sometimes men are afraid to give that advice. And then too, I think too, if we're moving in that relationship with God the Father, trying to conform to the journey of his Son, and know that we're receiving his Spirit, that we're filled with his Spirit, that we trust that too in reaching out to these different ages. But of course too, you know, I find that it's important that in looking at the different ages, we try to put a level of expectation on a man that should be there. So for example, you know, in the past, I think a man used to reach maturity the age of 16, 17 when he was on a farm. I mean, at that time, he reached what it is to be a full man, you know, even a woman, 14 and 15. Now, today, that's kind of completely unintelligible to us with a school system and what we expect of children and our vision of educating them for the marketplace. But we need to have a vision of a man, say, if he doesn't be, we'll speak about men now, not women, but if I believe a man should become a full man by the time he's 17. Now, even Alexander the Great was leading men in battle, for his father, King Philip, when he was 16. And so that happened to other great men too. But they should at least be mature by the time they're 19, 20. And we need to start treating them that way, and not to excuse the fact they haven't reached a certain level of fulfillment, and have a certain level of expectation that at least by your 20, I'm to deal with you as a man now. And what happens is, I think, where parents and uncles and others do a youth a disservice, male and female, is especially at that age where they should be of the fullness of a man, the fullness of a woman, we should start treating them as such. And even if they're immature, we should still start treating them as such. Because it's very important that if they're not mature by the time of 20, that they, iron sharpens iron. They should start being sharpened to meet that level of expectation they should be at in terms of their maturity. And so I think it's important to deal with a man at that level. And this is very hard, I think. I've noticed for parents nowadays, it becomes very, very hard for even them, because in the age of college and all these other things, which, post-secondary education, or we, lower middle class and above especially, have these expectations upon children that, well, they're going to go to college 22, they may go to graduate school, so they may be busy 24, 25, and they need to get a job. And after that, they can think about settling down. And so they don't have a vision of helping their child become a full-formed adult, say a female by the time she's at least 18 maybe, and a man by the time at least he's 20. Now, I throw these years out, but I don't think I'm too far. I think we should, from a woman, expect fullness of maturity by 18, and a man at least by the age of 19. Excuse me, 20, I think, especially in today's culture. And if we don't start treating them as that, they never really become that. And so I find that young men and young women, they need to start acting in a certain independent way and start making their own decisions, because we don't want to retard that growth, especially at those years. We don't want to keep dependence on the parents. And so I find that's very important in bringing children up.
Yeah, I find, kind of the age disparity you point out makes sense to me, at least. I know, because I teach freshman high school kids, and there's definitely at least a year plus gap, I think, between the girls and the boys in terms of maturity and seriousness about even things about school and things about life. But that gap does close, though. By the time they become seniors, so when they're about 18 or so. But it's still there a little bit. How about at that age? How about like a 14-year-old? I mean, what's the example of trying to treat a 14-year-old in a way that is helping them to become independent and fully formed?
Okay, well, first, I think in the beginning, I think it's to wake up their aspirations. What I find in youth today is that, especially at that age, and sadly even later, but at that age, I believe a lot of youth still need to be woken up to many realities. And so, wake up their passions a little bit, and maybe their desire for adventure, and their desire to do great things, their desire to have a good name, their desire to be better, their desire to stand out in the crowd. And by standing out, sometimes, for youth, that just means we're of a good character, that we're become respectable. Not that we don't want trained kids to seek attention and whatnot, but we do want to wake up that desire to want to be respected and honored, and the desire to do great things, and the desire to, even young kids, they're motivated by great figures they see in movies. And so to wake up some of this, I think, is important, because if we don't wake up what's in the nature of the person and their aspirations and the things that are just latent within them to do great things. Because if we're called to be a leader, protector, provider, if we're called to be a priest, prophet, and king, where those desires are planted in us naturally. And I believe when a kid hits puberty, those need to be woken up and then slowly nurtured, or even nurtured out the gate, And so now some of those things we treat someone a little bit earlier. I mean, sometimes, when your child's 11, it's got brothers and sisters that are 5 or 6. Well, you put them in charge over your younger brother and sisters sometimes, so they lead, or you don't start waiting until a kid's 13, 14 to take them camping and exploration. Of course, that's something, that's in a boy, that's something you want to nurture very early, right? You want to give them a lot of outdoor experiences, because we learn by nature, and fundamentally we learn by touch more so than sight. And so when we give somebody contact with nature, it just helps mature them and grow, helps them grow. And of course, we need that. That needs to start at the earliest of ages. But yeah, I just think that, so to wake up the passions, wake up what's interior in man, and start giving him some minor duties. So what are the things a 14-year-old should be doing as a leader, a protector, or a provider? I'm thinking right away as a provider. Sometimes it's good to, and when a kid hits puberty, they need to start learning responsibility a little more strictly. I mean, I think a young child should learn responsibility, maybe to make their bed, or they may have a night for dishes or something like that. But then that responsibility amps up to something a little more mature, where what they do is not just a chore that they do for the sake of the family, but they actually do some sense of service that's kind of at a higher level, that bespeaks of something that foreshadows what an adult would do. So, you may not invite your son, to help you fix the toilet. You should ask him to invite him into that project. But when he's 14, you should expect him, hey, son, we got to fix this. Let's work on this together. And so the level of expectation should be there. Son, we got to check the roof. I need you to help me out with this. Now, I mean, I was on a roof when I was 5 and 6. So, and I was pounding in shingles when I was 6 and 7. But, that was my journey. But there's got to be ways that a father invites his son into that at his level, but with a certain level of expectation, like, son, this is not your man now. I mean, you're becoming a man here, and we need to start doing man things. And so helping me out in the yard or on the roof, or fixing the toilet, or fixing your sister's bike is something that we expect you to do. And so that responsibility, I think, is something that needs to be nurtured at that level as well, at the time of puberty as well.
Now, are there certain things that we should focus on to address the different components of the idea of the finished man? Or is there, certain, I don't know, I'm looking for a program,
I mean, it's interesting. We talk about, these 7 categories of human formation. I think a parent does become a better parent if they actually even think about these things and write some of these things down. How do you want to form your child spiritually? How do you want to form them intellectually? Intellectual, at least in terms of things maybe they should know, maybe not in terms of the sciences. We understand they need to grow in that. But I mean, intellectually, what are some things they need to know about life? What are things which you wish you would have known at the time you were 14 that you weren't told, And of course, a lot of us, we go through life, most of us men, when we're 18, we say, or 19, 20, well, maybe even more so at 25, we often say, gosh, when I was a kid, I wish I really learned how to do this. Or I wish I would really learn. I wish my dad would have taught me how to box. I wish I went camping more. Or I wish, oh gosh, what do I say? I wish I'd learned how to do more things, how to build things, how to construct things. Because a man, when he gets older, he realizes, oh my gosh, I really don't know how to use a screwdriver very well. Or if the sink breaks, he's embarrassed before his wife. And it's interesting, the women, of course, maybe they have less expectation now of the men they see around them. But even 20 years ago, I mean, if the car breaks down, or the sink is leaking, or something else is going wrong, or the roof is leaking. I think 20 years ago, a woman would just expect her husband to at least jump on that and have some ability to take care of that, at least know how to diagnose it. And a lot of young men don't. And so, so it's good that men learn these things. Fortunately, my father's a contractor, so I learned how to work with my hands. So I was never afraid of trying to take things apart and trying to figure it out. Of course, some things were easy to do back in the day. I mean, cars were a lot easier to fix, and a lot of things were easier to fix. Now they're pretty complicated. especially because they're electronic and more electronic and less mechanical.
Right.
But of course, a toilet's easy to figure out. That one's easy. The components are
still mechanical, right?
Yeah, and I don't think in the last 40 years we've made much advancement in toilet science. So I think things are generally the same. I mean, I take them apart and I could find out what the problem is, or even.
Yeah, I'm always surprised when sometimes I have friends who are like, they handle a toilet breaks and they're like, oh, I got to call a plumber. I'm like,
yeah,
like seriously?
Yeah.
Why don't we just open the lid? Let's see what's going on in there. Like,
yeah, and so that's a big part of it. So it's a matter of, especially with these simple things, it's a matter of usually, especially for a toilet, you can figure you start messing with the handle and you can figure out all those components. I don't even know how to enunciate all those components or dissect them. I just know what they are, but it's not that hard to figure out what the problem is. Some things are pretty simple, and it's
very satisfying. It's satisfying to problem solve like that.
Yeah, and I think generally speaking, 80% of all problems, all malfunctions are easy to fix, or at least the solution is easy. Now, it may not be easy to find that solution sometimes, but I think what's nice is, of course, when I was growing up, when I was younger, you didn't have, of course, you had hardware stores, and you used to get advice. And in fact, maybe now that I think back, in the older days, we just had hardware stores, not Home Depot and Lowe's. I think the advice you got was better.
Oh yeah,
because men took that more intimately. And now with Lowe's, and I don't think you have.
Even now, I gladly spend a little more money to go to my local hardware store where I know I'm going to have a conversation. Yeah, or a guy who has some experience is going to come out and we're going to work the problem.
Yes,
as opposed to being a lost sheep searching through Home Depot trying to find a human being.
Yeah, I'm doing that too, a little bit more too. Especially if I'm trying to figure out, I have this special metal cabinet I was given where I can sort things. It's great. I found out these things are very expensive. This is a used unit, and there's these handles. And yeah, I thought, well, I can go to Lowe's or Home Depot to figure out how to make these handles, or I can go to the local hardware store. We have a really good one here. And yeah, they're far more astute helping you figure out problems than some of these bigger conglomerates. Yeah.
I have let me tell a short story. I think it kind of illustrates this. We have our van had an air conditioning problem, and we took it to the dealer. And the problem now, even with the cars, like you said, the dealers they're not even mechanics anymore so much. They're component swappers, right? They're trained to look at a computer, get a code, pull out a component, swap it out.
Yeah.
Well, our air conditioner was older. It needed a mechanical solution. And so I had to, I literally coached them and mentored them through getting comfortable with, let's take it apart. Let's see how it works. And sure enough, after a few months, literally months, they actually came up with a solution. And they were so happy. I never saw a car dealer so happy about the fact that they'd solved a problem. And to this day, every year when it's summer, I email them and give them an attaboy. Say, hey, to let you know, it's still working. But because they just the act of being able to solve a mechanical problem and use that part of your mind and then feel the satisfaction of completing that task. It was
great. Yeah. I mean, a human person, is called to do and to perform and to achieve. And there's some for us men, when we create with our hands and fix with our hands and mold with our hands, it's just highly satisfactory to do that. And in the order of nature, we're not to be consulting a lot too. We're supposed to learn these things and then carry them out when we need to. And the satisfaction is something very deep. To create is something very, it's very primal in our nature. And so, you know that a man who doesn't know how to use tools or use his hands well to fix things, that impresses women very much too. They're very, very impressed with men who can do things and figure very practical things out. In fact, in some way, they're not interested in men living in their heads who understand maybe fathers of the church or higher theology, but can't change oil. They're not impressed with that. and they shouldn't be. And so, yeah, it's just that, and yeah, the reality is it's things that you be taken care of and tended to. Things break all the time. And so, and malfunction, and even need to be, or even just adjusted. Things need adjustments. And so it's very, very good to train a boy out the outset that he be involved in that, so he doesn't have fears about things breaking down. You know, when the car breaks down or something leaks, or I'm trying to think of something else, the electricity doesn't work or something. Now, of course, that's something you have to be a little extra careful with. But for the most part, if a man's trained attending these things, it's so important that the things he achieves and does in life, that he have not fear about it, for a number of reasons. I mean, fear will lend to a kind of immaturity of his character development. But what happens is, in all levels of the spirit and nature, is if a man's filled with fear, it's very hard for him to see the reality properly and then to carry it out, to exercise his will, to do what is good, to achieve what he needs to achieve. Fear is very, I mean, it's very toxic on the spiritual level, but on the natural level, it can keep him from achieving and doing the things and realizing things he needs to achieve and realize, and can hold him back. And once I find too, you know this yourself, you know, if you approach something with confidence, you know, your chances of figuring out the solution are higher. They just are. And we can find remedies, and we could figure things out and move forward in life a lot faster and more quickly and smoother and more happily when we don't have fear about these things, and can do them with, or at least move forward with a kind of confidence. And that confidence for us men is fostered, not, it's, you know, fixing a toilet, it's not fostered spiritually so much. It's fostered by doing, you know. I mean, I think too, yes, we become a beloved son of God, we can foster certain confidence, but that confidence has got to be very practical too, and for the practical order. And so being spiritual is not going to make us confident about fixing things necessarily. And so we need to be doing those things to grow in that confidence and that courage.
Right. You know, as you say that, and something you said earlier, so one of the things that, ironically enough, I sometimes have a fear around, I think I'm a fairly confident person. There's a lot of things, but I tend to have a fear around financial management. And when I say that, I don't mean, you know, I've made good money and I can save my money and I can do a budget, but, you know, investing money. And it's ironic because that was my father's, he was a financial guy, right? And I think about it, when you said earlier, one of the reasons why I think I've had that problem is, for some reason, he was afraid to give me advice. You were saying earlier, right? Like, we can't be afraid to give advice. Like he it was almost like, I can't read his mind. It was almost like he was afraid to be responsible for me making a mistake based on the advice he gave. And
yeah,
so how do we as men not fall into that trap and feel and give young men advice, even if in the back of our head we're thinking, either I'm not 100% confident with this, or I'm afraid they're going to make it? Because that's, I think it's,
yes,
bad.
some advice, giving advice is better than not giving advice, generally speaking. And so, for the most part, remember, if we give advice lovingly and caringly, and it should be received on that level. Now, we can't always control that, but then it shows that we care, and that here is a solution you may want to consider. And it could be wrong, but chances are it will lead to a better direction than not giving advice.
Right.
Now, what I find, now this leads to a very important principle of what we find in emasculation society. And I hope women won't be disparaged or insulted about this, but one of the ways women think is they will fail to give advice or fail to correct based upon a foreseen outcome that might be negative. So a lot of times they're afraid to tell their child to do something, or they're afraid to guide their child in something or suggest something, because they're afraid that they may be giving bad advice or that a bad effect may take place. And for a woman too, even that bad effect can be not being liked. Okay. And so when men should not possess that fear. I think there's other natural fears for men and some more natural to women. Okay. But I find that if men are afraid that they give the wrong advice and maybe a wrong outcome, I think in some way that's a sign of a kind of a part of emasculation that's gone on, because it tends to more of a feminine quality. And I think a man needs to have a certain boldness that says, hey, better advice than no advice. And better advice with confidence than no confidence. Because I find too that a big part of giving advice is maybe to have a certain confidence about it on one level, maybe a little humility on another. Hey, you might try this. This seems to work great much of the time. And so, you know, there's a humility. Hey, it may not be exactly what you need, but there's a confidence. Hey, try this. Give it a shot. And so part of helping out a young man is to help him grow in confidence, not particular solutions. You know, one of the things I thought, a direction I thought you were going when you talked about financial management is the details of financial management, which I hate. I hate record keeping. I can't stand a lot of those. And so in some way, maybe I have a fear of that insofar as I hate it. You know, I just don't like all those meticulous things of financial management and keeping that financial order. For me, it's work and it's something I'd rather not do. And where women are good with a lot of those details and that detail kind of work, that's why they just make better secretaries and bookkeepers and things like that. But yeah, and so there's a lot of things which, you know, we got to learn how to not be afraid of even little things. In fact, I remember Jordan Peterson. I heard one conference of his talking about entrepreneurs. And he said, one of the things that makes a good entrepreneur is that they don't resent any part of the business that they need to, part of that, the duties it takes to carry out a good business. And so if a man he has a certain widget, he also has to market that widget. Now, if he loves making the widget and creating the widget and talking to the widget, wonderful. But he should not be afraid of the marketing aspect of it, or resent it rather.
Right.
Because if he resents it, it's gonna harm his whole project. And so we have to teach boys in a way not to resent what it is to be anything that takes to be a good husband or a good father, or to carry out something in the trades. You know, sometimes even for men when they grow, you know, first of all, we need to be in some way teach them to be husbands and need to be fathers. I believe in some respects. Though in some way when we speak of fatherhood, I think there's more duties there. But one thing a man often needs to learn is he needs to learn what it is to be patient with his wife. Okay, now obviously a woman needs to learn how to be patient with her husband. I understand all that, but one of the things I find that in a lot of men today, a lot of men understand that they need to be patient with their wives in certain things. What they don't understand is that they shouldn't resent it. They shouldn't resent having to be patient, you know, and so they need to overcome that resentment. And I find there's other things that men will resent when it comes to married life, and even resent when it comes to raising children, or right, certainly resent in their own.
I've seen this sometimes with Catholic men or Christian men, right? You don't want to walk around with the cross like a badge of honor. Like, look how many crosses I endure. Like you have pride about your suffering. That's not the idea.
You know, and I'm glad you said that too, because in a lot of earlier Catholic theology or spirituality, let's say, or mode of life, we talk a lot about the cross. And so, especially among the Irish, you know, you suffer, you know, we kind of talked about, yeah, life is just a lot of suffering. And then we used to advise that when somebody suffers, well, offer it up. Well, offer it up for what? Well, for intentions and souls in purgatory. And that's good. That's a good thing. But the problem is you depersonalize it too. And you say, hey, you know, you're given, you know, instead of saying, I believe, this is my opinion, you want to teach children, yes, or yeah, children even, let alone adults, that when they suffer and they offer up that suffering, yeah, it can give grace, it bestows grace. But a higher level is, you know, when you persevere through this, you give God great honor. You know, you console God by this. you know, you know, so I think for suffering, oftentimes, I don't, in my opinion, out the gate, which used to be a lot of Catholic thinking that, well, teach people that suffering is meritorious. Okay, yeah, it is. But it's not, we fail to make things personal, especially personal when it comes with the Godhead. And so that, hey, you know, you give your God the Father great honor when you persevere this. And hey, you give Jesus some honor too when you see this in light of his journey and not yours. And hey, you honor the Spirit when you know that you will give him those graces to withstand this and do so nobly. And so I just find a lot of tasks in life, in everything in life, I really believe that, and if this is hard for men to understand, that we need to learn to operate in a relational mode. And so even when they're fixing the sink or fixing the toilet, it's not a matter of just fixing a problem. But, and I think most men have this sense, but I'm serving my family here. This is the way I love my family. I think most men have that sense, but it still needs to be the overriding sense as opposed to, you know, some, you know, to be lost in the calculations of figuring these things out.
Right.
We'll tell you what, let's close there and we'll pick up something like this next time. All right. Glory be to the Father and to the Son and to the Holy Spirit. As it was in the beginning,
just now,
and never shall be.
World
without end.
Amen.
Amen.
If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to the Men's Academy YouTube channel. You can also find us at themensacademy.org and donate there if you feel so moved. God bless.